What was she gone for? She was on. She came back Sunday. You said at 2 at night.
Yeah, because her flight got delayed from Arizona because of like other storms around the nation. So she's supposed to get home at like 11. She got home at like 1:48. She got in bed about 2.
What was she going for? Like family trip or what?
It was a Thrive direct sales. It was a local event that was down there between a bunch of leaders in the company.
And that day she was back.
I left work early that morning, like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely got into bed pretty much.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. It's Friday. I hope you've all had a good week and are looking forward to the weekend. Today we'll go into the slip of the tongue that we all missed in terms of Chris Watts. This comes from the Sermon on the Porch. We'll be dealing with it directly, and a lot of this is related to a blog written on crimerocket.com on November the 1st, 2018. And I suggest that if you want to get the actual content, please visit the blog and refer to the links. There's a link right at the beginning, the 444. If you click on that link, it'll take you to the exact moment in the YouTube video where the slip happens. Before we get to that, please subscribe to this channel, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Right, so this particular blog post was an unusually detailed one that I did in Crime Rocket. I usually save this sort of detail for the books that I write, but in this case I'm going to review the particular blog post. It will be much better for you to go and visit the blog post and to click on the links to hear the audio. I'm not going to be going to a terrible amount of effort in this video in terms of showing you the video in this video and playing the audio in this video. It's just a simple matter for you to go to the blog and to play it. I'm going to review the blog post and maybe offer a little bit of commentary, but I'm being a bit lazy, I'm afraid, on this Friday. I'm not going to go to the effort to sort of put get the right video and audio in place. As I say, it's easily gotten hold of on the blog post. And by the way, the books that I write, the narratives, have the same kind of style. There's also transcribing of content. There's also hyperlinks to the exact moment where things are said, and an analysis sort of very fine-tuned analysis related to these details. One last thing before we get to the particular post. What is fascinating with the Watts case is we had these two pretty large interviews with the media that essentially doomed Chris Watts. The first, which I call the Sermon on the Porch, was around about 7 minutes, and that gave us a sort of first overview of his position. It gave us a sense of his body language, gave us a sense of him as a sort of a silver fox, and there was something off about it. We couldn't quite say what it was, but interestingly, that 7 minutes, that Sermon on the Porch that was 7 minutes long, was followed by a second kind of follow-up sermon on the driveway, which was about 8 minutes long, and we're going to deal with that later this weekend. I'll try to touch on it on Sunday, but there's some interesting content that comes out of that sermon on the driveway. It was actually through another YouTuber that posted a recent video about what's showing anger that prompted me to sort of go into the sermon on the driveway in more detail. So we'll be getting to that on Sunday. Meanwhile, let's get started with the slip of the tongue that we all missed. At 4:44 in the interview clip, Chris Watts let slip an extraordinary clue. We missed it because the journalist used that moment to rejig his camera, and so as the question is being lined up, the image is temporarily off camera. This resetting throws Watts off camera and throws off our concentration as well. Because while we're looking at him, we're sort of listening to him, and when the camera sort of moves away, our listening somehow gets disconnected. It's a strange thing how sometimes we look and listen on the same sort of line, and so when what we're seeing doesn't line up, we don't listen either. So when one only listens to the audio, and when we anchor the scene to a narrative, when we nail it down to a transcript, the slippery slip is captured in our true crime net. So let's do that now. To pick up what he's saying and how the slip happens, we need to back up about 50 seconds. Again, you really recommended to go to the blog post at the end of this video and then go and sort of perform these exercises and listen for yourself. But for now, here's the context. Chris Watts has just made a long speech about wanting everyone to just come home. And this is it. This is obviously my voice, but this is the content. The reporter asks, "Can I ask another tough question? Your relation with the kids?" And so it's quite important that it's in the context of this question. He's already being primed that it's going to be a difficult question, and then it's the loaded aspect, which has likely got a lot of guilt. It's related to his children, not only related to his children, but what's his relation to the children. And you can imagine, because he has murdered his daughters, because he has gotten rid of his unborn child, it's something he ought to feel very guilty about. It's something he ought to feel very shaken and I wouldn't say remorseful, but there should be a lot of emotion around this particular question. And we know that there was. Chris Watts is an introvert, so although we don't see the emotion's there, and often with introverts, they are more emotional than most of us. I'm not saying the emotion in this case is appropriate. In other words, he may be emotional in terms of he's emotional about Kissinger. So him being emotional about his children doesn't mean he cares about them. I think it's more a case that he's afraid of being found out by the media. So there's fear here, and he's afraid that he's going to be shown to be what he is. In other words, not a caring father, not a very suitable romantic partner either as a result. So let's get to his response. And again, you should really go and play it to hear it. But when he does respond, he sort of stutters. He answers again. Now the question is, what's your relation with the kids? What's your relationship with your children? And in fact, his relationship at that point was that they were dead. That he was now a childless father, and he wanted to be. And so how he responds is, whenever, I mean, the kids are my life. I mean, those smiles are my life. And there's like, I mean, last night, like during, when they usually did dinner, it was just like, I missed them. Like, I mean, I must tell them, hey, you got to eat that, or you're not gonna get your dessert. And then he chuckles. and just like not going to get snack after. I miss that. Cuddle up on their couches. They have like a Minnie Mouse couch and Sophia couch that they cuddle up on and watch on Bubble Guppies or something, and it was just like, I was it was tearing me apart last night, and I needed that last night, and for nobody to be here last night, and then going into their rooms and know that I wasn't going to turn the rain machines on, and know that I wasn't going to turn their monitor on. No, I wasn't going to kiss them to bed tonight. It was like that's why last night was just horrible. I couldn't do it. I just want everybody to come home, like wherever they are at, come home. That's what I want. And so you can see when you focus on this particular aspect, when you deal with that particular response, you're dealing with something really strange and really, it's really an aberration. If you go to the trouble to count the words in that response, it's 225 words. It's a lot. It's a lot of response from a guy who's usually quiet. And you can see he doesn't really even answer the question, right? He's asked about his relation with the children. And if you think of it in a very general sense, what should he have said? He should have said something like, we have a good relationship, I love my girls, I'm worried about them, and something about their medication, right? And instead this response is all over the place. He refers to missing them a number of times. They've been gone one day basically. Why is he missing them? It's almost like he's resigned himself to the fact that they are gone in a more permanent sense. But what I mean is, he doesn't need to miss them. Go and look for them if that was the case. So what's being revealed here in his psychology is the resignation to the fact that they're gone. He's telling the media that he misses them. Maybe he does miss them, or maybe he's telling the media what he thinks they want to hear, that he's missing them. I don't think he is. I think he's happy to be where he is. He looks happy. But the important thing is that he's already reached the point, one day after their disappearance, where he's framing it as he's missing them, as if that he's, as I say, resigned himself to them being like away on holiday or just away. He's not really in the position to doing something, and we know why, because he's responsible. Another aspect that I highlighted was the strange statement he makes where he says, it was tearing me apart last night and I needed that. I mean, just think about those words. He was being torn apart and he needed that. And I think it's sometimes statements like that say so much more than all of the analysis that we can do, all the evidence that there is. It's a statement like that, it's a sort of a slip. This isn't the main slip that I'm getting at, but it's part of it. Really speaks volumes. If you just take those words, it was tearing me apart last night and I needed that. And in the context of what he's saying here, that doesn't really make any sense. Why would he need to be torn apart, right? But if you take it in the broader context of what he's not saying and what we know was actually going on, his affair with Kissinger, he was being torn apart. He was being torn apart by her, right? And I needed that. In other words, he did want to be torn apart. He did want to be torn apart from his family. And besides that, he's using the past tense here. He's referring to I missed them, and then tearing apart is in the present tense. So I don't know if you see that. I missed them is already resigned to them being out of the picture, and it was tearing me apart is almost a admission of both the past and the present. It was tearing me apart. Tearing me apart is kind of a present tense, but it was tearing me apart, but it's no longer tearing him apart, if you're following what I'm saying. By getting his family out of his life, his family is no longer tearing him apart. The fact that he's having an affair and wants to be with this woman, the fact that they're no longer there, it's no longer tearing him apart. And this is the ironic thing, is everyone is looking at this and people are feeling torn apart and heartbroken about what he's done to his family. Meanwhile, he's in a place where he's at last got relief by doing what he's done, this horrible deed that's tearing everyone else apart. He has kind of healed himself and healed his relationship. Maybe for one day, maybe for a couple of hours, but at that time that was true. I think the reference to "it was tearing me apart last night" is also putting something in the past, in the sense of last night it was tearing me apart, here I am the next morning, and well, am I being torn apart now? It doesn't look like he is, but in any event it clearly shows in his mind that he knows they're already dead. I think the words themselves also reflect a kind of violence. I think it's more psychological violence, but without knowing the autopsy results, the whole way of stuffing the little children's bodies to the thief hatch invokes the idea of tearing limbs. You've got to imagine it's an 8.5-inch hatch, so getting a body through that is going to cause strain onto tissues, and I think that pushing them through this almost like a keel orifice, is pushing them out of his life, and it's because they are tearing him apart, he's tearing them apart. And all of this is just the lead up to the slip. After this answer, there's a protracted silence where Watts curls his lower lip and presses it under his upper lip and holds it there for a few seconds. The cameraman uses this break to set himself up at a better angle. It's during this pause that the dogs can be heard barking loudly, and Chris Watts appears to blink rapidly, anxiously. The subject matter they're dealing with now is making him nervous, and it should. It's probably because of this anxiety and the direct question about his children stirring up the still raw memory of their corpses and the recent handling of their bodies, and having to account for it this soon, that causes his heart and mind to race. That's why the slip happens when it does. The reporter stumbles through his next question. He's not sure, it seems, what he wants to ask. He says something like, "Where has she gone for?" while the neighborhood dogs are still going nuts. And so what the reporter asks is, she came back Sunday night just under 2 at night? And then Watts answers, yeah, because her flight got delayed from Arizona, because like other storms around the nation, so she was supposed to get home like 11. She got home at like 01:48. Now he's swaying as he's standing. He flips out his left hand. Got to bed, blinks about 2 o'clock. It's amazing how specific he is about those times. 01:48, it's very specific. He doesn't say early this morning or just before 2 o'clock or whatever. Interestingly, Chris Watts glances towards the window as he says got home at like 1:48. Sometimes when we remember things, we do so in sympathy. We act out what happens. We look in the direction of where something happened as we re-navigate the memory of it. The slow blink when he says the word bed is significant. I don't think something happened in the bed as much as Shanann never made it to bed and probably didn't even make it upstairs. And so when he says the word bed, he's lying, and that's why he blinks at that point. That's my interpretation of it. The reporter then asks, what was she gone for? Like a family trip? Watts responds now is again swaying from one leg to the other, and he says it was a Thrive direct sales. It was a local event that was down there between a bunch of leaders. He flaps out his hands in the company. I must say, when I first saw this, I sort of wondered whether he kind of approved of the whole Thrive aspect. He did seem to approve of it in terms of the Thrive patches worked for him. In other words, he got fitter using them and he lost weight. But the question is, did he like the whole business? Did he like the people? Did he like the personalities? Did he like the whole spiel of it? And the way he talks, where he says between a bunch of leaders flapping out of his hand, it seems like he doesn't like them. It seems like it's not his kind of crowd, and one can imagine him being an introvert. It wasn't his preferred way of behaving or dealing with people, and yet he was constantly drawn into it because of Shanann and what she was doing at home. And then Watts folds his arms and he purses his lips again. And the reporter says, and then the day she was back, and obviously the reporter's pressing him, trying to get him to provide more detail. And so this is where the slip happens. Bear in mind, we've just gone through two aspects where Watts is sort of showing discomfort. He's being led down the garden path to where he doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to describe kind of the moment when he sees Shanann. He doesn't want to describe it. He doesn't want to describe his relationship with his children. And each time he's asked, it makes him uncomfortable. And the more uncomfortable he gets, the more he's concerned he's going to show nervousness. And so when the reporter sort of breaks into this territory, Watts sort of feels in a way disarmed, which is why he folds his arms. And so the question the question was, and then the day she was back, and so this is where the slip happens. He's still pursing his lips together, blinking rapidly. He's obviously nervous. The dogs are making a racket in the background when he starts answering, and he starts answering with a stutter. And this is it. Watts is shaking his head. There's a slight flash of teeth as he smiles. As far as I know, it may have been virtually the only flash of teeth during the sermon on the porch. There is a flash of teeth on the sermon on the driveway, but you don't often see the flash of teeth. There's a smile, and then there's a smirk and licking of lips. Flashing the teeth is a quite a big sign that one isn't able to control one's feelings, and there's sort of an involuntary shakiness in one's response, a kind of unconscious reaction that one can't subdue or repress. And so while he's swaying side to side, he stutters and he says, I left work for work. He glances to the left early that morning, like 05:15, 05:30. So like he holds out his hand. She shrugs, barely let me in. He glances up. She barely gotten, blinks into bed pretty much. That's a very short statement compared to the long one that we went through earlier, but it's filled with stuttering, and it also doesn't make any sense. Sometimes an open-ended question is the best way to get this kind of weird response, this weird sort of damning response. And it is kind of an open-ended question from the reporter. It's very unspecific, and he simply says, and then the day she was back, question mark. Watts knows exactly what he's asking, and now how is he going to answer the question? How is he going to answer, she arrived back from the airport and what happened then? And he can't answer it honestly, and that's the dilemma that he's in. And again, I don't believe that she got into bed and slept. If that was true, then at this point he could simply have said that. He could simply have said, yeah, she arrived and she got into bed. Instead of that, there's a lot of nervousness. He knows what's being asked and he's trying to not answer it. And how does he answer it? How does he answer it? he shakes his head, he's smiling, he's swaying from side to side, and he answers it by not answering it. He says, I left for work, and then he glances to the left, and we know that he did. We know from the Trinastich video surveillance that what he did. We know how he left for work. We know what that involved. And so him glancing left is also a memory acknowledgement of that moment, and it's not a pleasant memory for him in this position. If you had to put yourself in his shoes, if you could get into his brain and see through his eyes, imagine the terror of being suddenly faced on your own doorstep by a phalanx of reporters. They're all sitting there pointing their dark lenses at him. They've all got expressions on their faces, maybe holding out microphones, taking down notes. It's kind of a worst case scenario. It's one day after what he's done, and Yeri is standing not far from where he killed his own family, where he took their bodies into his truck. And when he glances that way, he remembers it, and then he's got to look back into the faces of the reporters and the cameras and not give that away, right? And I just want to refer back to that moment where he looks to the right, okay, where he's talking about specifically the time that Shanann arrived home. He gives the time, at like 1:48, and at that moment he glances at the window, right? He's not glancing at the window, he's glancing in the direction of where he saw Shanann. He's glancing at he's remembering Shanann entering the house, which he saw, and her approach to the stairway, which he saw, and the instrumental moment when he attacked her. And where is he looking? He's looking towards the window. He's not looking upstairs. He's not looking at the door. He's looking through the window. Now, I can hear people criticizing this and saying, you're not an expert, and how can you say that one glance means that and another glance means that? How do you know? And there's certain merit in that question, because Chris would be glancing around all the time, and a glance doesn't necessarily mean something specific, but the issue here, and that's why I say go and watch the video yourself, go and read the blog post yourself, go and study the material as I have, and you'll see it's the context that's important. He's being asked to remember, so he's remembering, right? He's being asked about a specific moment, and he's in situ, right, when he's remembering that. So when he's standing on the porch, when he's doing the sermon on the porch, and he's asked about 0148, where does he look? He looks through the window towards the staircase, towards the bottom of the staircase. Now, either that is a massive coincidence, or it's actual memory, right? Then when we deal with the other memory, when he talks about the going to work, he glances towards the driveway, and there we don't need his memory. We don't need to sort of ask ourselves, well, did he really go walk onto the driveway? I mean, why is he looking towards the driveway? Shouldn't he be looking way to the left, because that was where his truck was parked when Shanann arrived? But no, he's looking towards the driveway. We don't need to get into his brain, because we know from the surveillance footage that he pulled his truck up, and we know what he did. We know that he was involved. He was walking up and down the driveway several times that night, and it was unusual. So we know that glance means something. And if that glance means something, didn't the glance a few minutes earlier mean something? You see what I'm getting at? The weird thing when you watch the footage, and that's possibly why it's better to transcribe it and to read it and to study the transcription, is when you're watching it, you sort of trying to see him speak, but because he's stuttering, your eyes sort of catch that stuttering, and for some reason your ears switch off. Your ears are waiting for a proper statement, and because he's stuttering and his body language also stutters, your ears sort of don't engage. Whereas if you close your eyes, then you actually hear what he's actually saying. And as I say, if you take the question again, and this is always very important, is he answering the question? Is he answering the question on its own merits? And so the reporter was saying the day she was back, right? It should be the whole day, it should be the whole Monday. And instead of that, Watts doesn't really say it. It doesn't say, well, you know what, I never saw her on Monday, or he doesn't say, I saw her on Monday. Instead, he just says, well, I left for work. And that is his alibi. I mean, that was his alibi all along. He knew he was going to be asked the question, what happened when Shanann got home? Oh, well, I went to work. I was just at work. You can't blame me for what happened to the children. I was at work. I just got up and went to work as normal. That's his alibi. That was part of the premeditation. So we can completely see and understand why he's giving this response, starting off why I went to work. The problem is it's a premeditated response, and it doesn't quite line up with where people are in the reality, in that present reality. It lines up with his premeditated reality. In other words, the premeditation of what he was going to do and say after the crime happened. But being there, it's too early for him to say, well, I left for work. He needs to say, okay, what happened when Shanann arrived back? But he's in the dilemma that it's so early after the crime, and now he's got to explain something that he can't. How does he explain murdering her? He can't. And he hasn't thought enough about it to say what he saw, right? And so kind of an amateur in this version of events. Is almost the first time that he's really saying it. He gives the time that he leaves for work, and then he reverts back to try to answer the guy's question, and then he says she, and he shrugs, and then he says barely let me in. He glances up, she barely gotten into bed pretty much. And so the word that comes across there over and over again is barely. Why is he saying the word barely? It's a word that is associated with time. He's going to work, and she arrives home, and something barely happens, right? You see what I'm getting at? And in the context of this case, the barely really refers to he barely had enough time to execute this crime and get rid of the bodies because she was so late. That's the reality of it. The reality of it is also she barely got in when he attacked her, as in moments after she got in, that's when he attacked her. That's why there's this repeated use of the word barely 3 times in that one short paragraph. Just returning to the contents of the blog post, his mouth is open at the end of that in the holding pattern of a slight smile. So he says she barely gotten into bed pretty much. And so even the words pretty much, he's not very confident about gotten into bed. She barely gotten into bed pretty much doesn't make any sense. Consider that he buried her in a sheet from the bed, and so one nasty interpretation of the question and his answer is maybe he thinks it's funny what he did to her and with her, vis-a-vis the soft minimizing words he's giving about her to the media. She barely gotten into bed pretty much. Now, you must bear in mind, he's saying this after the fact of burying her in sand at the well site. Right? And I think this is why there's duping delight. This is why he's sort of smiling, because she never got into bed. He put her to bed in this dirt, as horrible as that was. But he's sort of smiling about the way he's phrasing it, and the fact that only he knows that. A lot happens in the entirety of his answer too. So few words, so much going on, so many lives undone between those letters, those lines. He stutters, he interrupts himself, he repeats himself, and he barely answers the question about what she, Shanann, was doing. He talks about himself leaving and where he was. The only word, and it's only one word that he offers to answer the implied question the reporter doesn't quite ask, which is where is bed, but he'd rather not say it. That's why it's bed, pretty much. He doesn't want to talk about where. Where is the big kahuna in this conversation? The one thing he really doesn't want us to know. And arguably, what says fooled everyone in terms of the where. Where was Shanann killed? Where were the children killed? Where did he put their bodies? He really didn't want anyone to know. I'm not going to take it any further. After the image of the gate in the blog post, I do expand on this a little bit further. Again, I want to encourage you to visit the blog post, visit the blog if you haven't already. If you someone who's always on YouTube and you get all your content, try a different medium for a change. Try reading. There's honestly a lot more detail that one can cover where something is written down, simply because one needs to think about it. You need to think about what you want to write, and you think a lot more about what you want to write than when you think about what you want to say. You need to be more meticulous, you need to be more accurate, you need to be more vested in facts and evidence and so on. And and you need to be more specific and obviously accurate. So yeah, please go to the blog post. I'll put a link to it at the end of the description. You can also see on the right hand margin of the blog post the many books I've written. So if you enjoy the blog post, do yourself a favor and go and get even more detail. It's very highly researched, meticulous detail with the same sort of links, the same sort of discussion, the same sort of analysis as this particular blog post. If you find value in this video or in the blog post, please share among your networks. And as promised, I will do a follow-up blog post similar to this one on the slip that we all missed during the Sermon on the Driveway. And I will try to bring that out for you guys on Sunday. Meanwhile, have a good weekend and thank you for listening.